Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Here we are on Saturday afternoon. I hope there's no National Party voters watching the broadcast today, because I think if they were, they'd be a bit more distracted from the smile and wave of the Prime Minister, and they'd look at the substance. And when you look at the substance of what's happening today, which is a bad bill being passed under bad process, I think they'd look twice at the National Party. I guess it's not surprising we've got this bad bill being passed under bad process, but I've been shocked. Where are the national members today? Where have they? Why haven't they stood up and presented the argument?
Order. A member can't refer to the absence of members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They certainly have been absent. We've seen...
Now, I know the members knew, but once I've made a statement and I've ruled, don't try and relitigate it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen some serious argument with serious counter-argument missing. We've seen some serious supplementary order papers presented and also voted down. I'm not talking about just political supplementary order papers. I'm talking about serious, credible SOPs which were voted down. Before the lunch break, we were discussing the urgency, and I think this is why this is bad process. Why are we passing this at 3:20, nearly 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon, under urgency? When I think of urgency, I think of tackling the climate crisis. I think of tackling the great economic problems. I think about tackling that growing gap between the rich and poor and the inequality in New Zealand. Over lunchtime, I went and welcomed Sea Shepherd to Wellington. When I think about urgency, I think about those hundreds of whales about to be slaughtered in the Southern Ocean, not one government department taking over another couple in the name of ideology. Before lunch, I talked about my photo analogy when I went to the archives and found this great collection of World War II photographs, ignorantly and uninformed, stuck together with glue, thereby wrecking these precious photographs forever, these tremendous one-offs. And I think it's an apt analogy for this bill. What we're seeing is uninformed, an ad hoc approach rushed through under urgency without due consideration, without due argument and thinking. And unfortunately, the risk is we're not talking about dusty old documents, we're not talking about hypothetical things, we're talking about treasures of our country. In a rushed debate today, we haven't heard the answers about why we need to be doing this, whether the institutions and the departments are broke. We haven't heard about whether we're talking about best practice to actually support the users of the National Library and the National Archives. We haven't talked about best practice internationally or whether this is taking us forwards or backwards, and we haven't heard the answers addressed legitimately about the concerns. I think a telling omission in the debate, in the officials' recommendations, in the Cabinet document, is what this bill is actually going to do for users of the National Library, what it's going to mean for historians, researchers, genealogists, what it's going to mean for people donating goods to the Alexander Turnbull Library. I think it's a telling omission because what it shows is this bill is more about ideology to do with getting rid of a few workers in the state sector, about state sector ideology, more so than it is about supporting best practice and these much loved and treasured institutions. I believe in absence of a robust argument or actual figures tabled when we talk about things like future-proofing, efficiencies, digitisation, if you don't have the facts, you're simply spouting slogans. And this is what we've heard from the get-go that started this process in the Cabinet documents through to the debate today. We've seen the bad process of the Minister of Twink, quickly twinking out our documents and the document that he tabled, as if he could only twink out those houses in the Mana electorate with his motorway that's going through there. I'm still baffled why we're debating this bill today while the national members on the Select Committee didn't go back to their caucus and Cabinet and say, well look fellas, all the evidence from all the experts said we shouldn't be doing this. There's no real reason. We're only talking about $165,000 a year. Come on guys, let's have a bit of common sense. But unfortunately, those members didn't go back and they haven't presented today a coherent argument why we're doing this. We heard from Minister Guy about the leaky roof under the last government. I mean, come on, let's be serious. We're talking about our national treasures today. I do want to thank, however, the members on the Select Committee for the questions. I want to thank Grant Robertson and David Shearer for the excellent work on Part 1 and Part 2 and 3. I want to thank the submitters, people passionately inspired and care about our national treasures. For them, this isn't just about dusty old documents. It's about their lifeblood, something they're absolutely passionate about. We heard about whether or not this is going to be debated in summer barbecues this year, and I'm sure it will, and I hope it will. Because what we're talking about is not lemon institutions, bad government departments. We're talking about well-regarded internationally institutions that perform well in the Cabinet paper, which started this process off. I guess the reasons why I'm mostly opposed is because the fact is it's a contradiction in terms. When the bill says we're going to be preserving the statutory independence, but it's a contradiction because at the moment we have the reality of independence, the National Librarian and the Chief Archivist. And what we're doing is relegating them to a third tier. We're dropping them from the All Blacks, dropping them down to a provincial rugby team, putting them on the bench. It's a contradiction to say that they're still going to have the same level of independence. The fact is they were chief executive officers, now they're simply employees. They're accountable to the Department of Internal Affairs, and they'll have to comply with the culture, the financial decisions that are made, the personalities of the Chief Executive of the Department of Internal Affairs. They're going to have to compete with the other third-tier chief employees, such as from the Passports Office, which Minister Guy talked about. They're going to have to compete within the Department of Internal Affairs for focus. And that's not good enough, because these aren't just any old departments like Passports. These are important constitutional departments. We've got the risk of conflict occurring between the different departments and within the Department of Internal Affairs. We've got the risk of that voice, which is so important, being silenced. We've also got the risk that we're going to see the worst of both worlds. Those chief librarians and national librarian spending a great deal of their time on that day-to-day administration of being part of Department of Internal Affairs without any ability to actually influence the executive team of the Department of Internal Affairs. I want to point out there have been some good changes to the bill, such as the ability of a separate and independent vote, and the good change in Select Committee, which was deleting most of the clauses between 47 and 58, thereby retaining the public records within the Archives New Zealand and not Department of Internal Affairs. Lastly, I want to touch on the risk to our image, which is true, and the national members may scoff at it, but the risk is true. We're worsening the standard when countries all around the world are investing in their institutions such as these. They're adopting best international practice. Now the US, UK, Australia and Canada all have more power, more profile, more independence of their statutory officers like the National Librarian than we do in New Zealand. This bill takes us backwards. It's contrary to the UNESCO guidelines, it's contrary to the International Council on Archives Principles document, and it's a step backwards. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad this bill is being split because I wholeheartedly endorse the Green Party's vote to be voting against parts 2 and 3. It's bad practice to be passing this bill under urgency. It's a bad bill. It's bad not to listen to the Select Committee submitters, which were overwhelming. It's bad not to listen to the experts in the field who produced coherent arguments which weren't backed up. It's a legitimate task. Is it broke? No. Is it adopting best international practice for the sector? No. Does it take us backwards? Yes. Is it really going to impact on the independence and the actual great work of these institutions? Yes. Should this bill proceed? No.